music to the noise, yeah, the mess we make. Machine Pun Kelly get caught in the fake. Facts and logic with a twist of jest. Strip it down to truth, yeah, forget the rest. Humor blows the lies right out of the park. Look beyond the shadows that set the dark. Sparks of laughter fire up the night, bringing clarity when they blur the fight. Cut through the chaos, yeah, the tangled lies. Fun Kelly with a set of clear eyes. Truths and jokes gonna rock this show. Step into light where the real facts glow.
Hello and welcome to the Pun Show, where today we have a very special guest, the dignified and honorable representative Jack Kimble, who is the member, currently elected. If I remember this right, you are unanimously elected. Is that right?
No, there's, it's always hard to break that 98% mark.
Okay. So near unanimously elected Representative Jack Kimble. And what district do you represent?
The Fightin' 54th.
The Fightin' 54th. And how many districts are there in California?
There's 52, but we were grandfathered in.
So that helps.
Yeah, I know you used to do basketball reporting. And basically when someone is a really good congressperson, they will retire their district number.
So what happened to the 53rd?
53rd still exists. I believe, I'm not quite sure who the representative is. There's so many of us, it's hard to keep track of.
Is it Devin Nunes's cow?
When we get to the point of having livestock in our Senate, I think we will achieve the greatness of the Roman Empire. So.
But what about Marjorie Taylor Greene?
I think that she might be our next senator from Georgia.
I mean, at least that would prevent the one good thing about that. If she were elected as senator, then Tommy Tuberville would not be the dumbest senator in American history anymore.
That is true. I think that's
there's always a bright side.
Pardon me?
There's always a bright side. There
is. Well, Tommy used to be like the dumbest football coach, and then just moved right along to being the dumbest senator.
So anyway, welcome to the Pun Show. And in case people have not figured it out, and apparently some people have not, you are a parody account.
Yes.
And I think, to me, you and Coach, speaking of coaches, are the two premier parody accounts on Twitter. And I just what gave you the idea for Jack Kimble? Where did this come from? What's the genesis of it?
Jack has evolved over the years. I originally started with another parody. It was just a blog. There was no social media. It was pre-Twitter. It would have been in the early 2000s, maybe 2004 or 5. I know I got involved a lot when 2008, called That's Right, Nate. And Nate was a self-storage owner who, owned a self-storage facility, and he talked a lot about storage and also poor right-wing talking points. I remember I didn't fool nearly as many people, but I did get into a long discussion in my comments with Roger Ebert, because I reviewed the movie, what's the one, the Blue Aliens? It was Avatar. But I admitted I hadn't seen it, and then so I used clips from Flash Gordon, and Ebert was like, "How can you review a movie you haven't seen?" And and that was so one of my followers was actually friends with him and let him in on it. It's that was probably the first celebrity that I ever kind of fooled. And then from there, I had Jack sometimes. Oh, I remember what started it actually. My sister went to Notre Dame for graduate school. Graduated in 1985, and their graduate speaker was Duarte, the head of El Salvador with the death squads. And then that year, Obama was going to speak at the Notre Dame graduation, and people were talking about this is most immoral speaker that Notre Dame has ever had, and blah blah blah. And then I looked like they had Sherman, who burned the South to the ground. And I just you could find a lot of people that you could make cases were not really great people, and
these people probably defend Donald Trump presenting himself as the Pope now too.
Yeah, exactly. So that I did an op-ed, and so from time to time I'd have Jack pop over in there. And I was a teacher, and one spring break I had a week off, and I'm really bad when I got like 1 week and nothing to do. And so I decided, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to make a blog for a congressman and see if anybody realizes that it's fake. And my real goal was to try and kind of more fool people than do satire. I remember the first post I had was about a Veterans to Walmart Workers center that I was doing the ground baking for. And I was doing a lot of things where I was trumpeting like the fact that it was my district was really old. So I had a lot of legislation about grandchildren having to visit and stuff. And that was the thing. For a while, it was like, is he real or not? And then I started kind of evolving. And yeah, I do enjoy when especially someone who's pretty big up there, celebrity or academic or something, is fooled by the account. But for me, I use it as a way to try to satirize the same old ridiculous right-wing talking points.
So, like, I feel like I omitted one person, Liam Neeson.
I would say Liam Neeson. Well, I was going to mention him, and I love Liam's account. One of the things that has been very, I kind of like, okay, 2 times in like the last 3 months, I have interacted with Liam's account being funny. And the number of people who were like, you idiot, you can't even find a parody account. And I'm like, yeah, I wish I knew more about these parody accounts. And he was, but it was like Liam one day decided, okay, I'm tired of people mistaking me from Liam Nelson. He said he was like changing his name, Liam Neeson, he's changing his name to Liam Nelson. So I wrote a post where I accused him of being the actor Judd Nelson. And it was just, it was just a throwaway. And I went somewhere and I came back out to my car and before I drove, I checked my tweets and I had like 1,000 replies to that. And I'm like, no way. And I just did another one where I made a comment, and I sometimes feel like people are so quick to jump on people who, make a mistake when it's just like, look, I always say, if someone's on our side and they just haven't figured it out, let them off the hook. If someone's on the other side and they are just can't figure it out, don't help them, but I was just having so many people that it's just like, now the people who got it were like, oh my gosh, it's like parody Inception. And
yeah.
That was there are some other accounts I really like. Pastor Love has some really fun stuff. Also religious. MAGA Church Pastor is another one I really like.
I don't think I've seen him.
Yeah, I always refer to them as my spiritual advisors. But there are not a lot, and I also know there's ones that I miss that there's been some big accounts and people have referred, I said, oh, you're like this guy, and I look at him, there's like a British MP who's really good, and I can never remember his name. So there are some good ones out there. There are some bad ones out there too, obviously, but
Now, to me, like the art to a good parody account is being able to strike the balance between like I guess I'll put it this way, like it should take you like a second to get the joke.
Right.
Like you know, like you have to go like you had the one that we were talking about before before we started the broadcast, where you were talking about reopening Alcatraz because then we can fit, you know, all the criminals in the White House there.
Right.
And a lot of people were missing the whole part about the criminals in the White House.
Yeah.
And just kind of like calling you an idiot for it and jumping on that. But I mean, like there should be just like a drag of like 1 second before your brain clicks in and goes, "Oh, that's a joke." And sometimes people don't wait for that second.
See, I've always and it can be tough because that's probably up to like 50,000 likes by now. But those 400 or 500 people go, you know, and it's like, for one, I really hate when people use the R word.
I hate that.
And gosh, that goes in my feed so much.
Or any derivation of that, like when they like Trump tard or whatever. I hate that. And
you know, I just like I knew that, you know, I know when I post something, I'm gonna get, you know, at least a couple hundred people using that. And so I've just gone to like, I block it now. And you know, I used to, you know, and it's like, yeah, I just block. But no, that's the thing. It sometimes it does get really, really frustrating because, like, okay, 50,000 people might have liked it, but you know, I can't read the comments from followers because my stream was just full up with people who didn't read the entire tweet. You know, there are some who didn't understand it, but that one, most people, it was just they saw, oh, he wants to reopen Alcatraz. You know, right there, diatribe. You know.
So how many like ratio do you I imagine you also get Trump supporters who are like, yeah, like that take you seriously and agree with you?
I don't get very many, and people are always like some Trump supporter is going to believe you, and I'm like, well, first off, if they're going to believe me, because someone said that about that Alcatraz, and say we need to open Alcatraz because there's too many criminals in the White House, good, you know. And I'm always like, look, I feel like our country is 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 at this point. Yeah. There's 1/3 in the middle that's winnable. There's 1/3 that's on the side of everything good and just that I like. And there's 1/3 that is just, we're never going to convince them. And I always feel like we're kind of fighting for the people in the middle. And if the people on the far right really were to start copying my talking points, how persuasive would they actually be? You know,
I'm going to actually disagree with you a little bit there, and I think this could be an interesting discussion. I think there's 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. I think you're right there. I think 1/3 is, you know, like the Trump supporters, and then we're the 1/3. But I think the other third, and I think this is where the media misses it a lot. The 1/3 is on the left of us, not in the middle. I think we're the third in the middle. And I think that there's a lot of people on the left that are upset that the Democrats, they're not upset with the Democrats because they disagree with what the Democrats say so much as the Democrats aren't doing enough to stop Trump. They're like, you know, like I think that you know, and you get, you know, like I don't know who people mean when they talk about liberals in the left and the far left or whatever. Yeah. And I think everybody means different thing. And I think these things are ill-defined because I don't think we discuss enough about, like, we've just always had this left, right, and independent. And then independents are in between. But I think right now it's the independents are actually on the left for the most part.
I would disagree, but I also do think there is a substantial number of people there. I am pretty left, and definitely to the left of the Democratic Party. But there's like different levels of leftness.
Yeah.
I was involved in Chicago Teachers Union politics for quite a few years. And because of that, there were like I kind of saw this. There were the people who were, I mean, there were more women, well, because it was teachers union, there were more women than men, but it was like some of them were very typical Bernie supporters, you know, who really like were on that side, and even, you know, further left. And then there's what I call the political hipsters. There is those people who will really love a band until they hear them on the radio. And the second they hear them on the radio, they're a sellout.
Right.
And it's kind of like they support a politician until they get some piece of legislation passed or win an election, in which case they're a sellout. And it's like those people will never, ever be happy with anything. And it's a small but vocal percentage. Most people on the left, we really do need to work for. And it's one of the things that I do see is a problem with a lot of these Democratic strategists, because believe me, the Rahm Emanuel wing of the party I have major problems with. And one of the problems is they always look at it as like this triangulation where it's like people have to vote for us or people have to vote for them. So we just have to be to the left of where they are and it'll work. And the problem is they leave out the third alternative, which is people say, yeah, I'm not going to vote and stay home. And, or, you know, it's like, yeah, I can't, I'm totally very supportive of the AOC Bernie tour. I'm very supportive of that. It's like the quote unquote Jill Stein Democrats who aren't really Democrats, not so much. You know,
I think we're very much in agreement on that. So like I think a good way to approach this conversation is what David Hogg is doing right now, where he's talking about primarying some safe seats that are too comfortable in where they're at, you know, and so I think what we do is we end up getting past the primaries and then we're just like vote blue no matter who. And then, you know, during the primaries, we say just support whoever's in power. Right. And it's like, you can't. So then when are people that think that the Democratic Party has moved too far to the right, when do they get a say in anything? You know, it's like we want to take out their voice, but then ask them to support it no matter what. And so it's like, if you're going to say vote blue no matter who, then you need to say vote blue no matter who too. Like, so, you know, like have an honest primary where everybody can run and everybody can have a chance to win. And then after the primaries, then you can say vote blue no matter who. Right. But after there's been a chance for the left to have a voice, like if you don't let them have a voice, they won't feel empowered if they aren't empowered. So, you know, I think what AOC is doing is great. I think what David Hogg is doing is great. I think we need to challenge the Democratic Party to move back to the left. We need to move back to workers' rights. I think we need to move back to universal health care. I think this idea of so many in the Democratic Party now that are just, we need to abandon trans people. You know, like all of those kinds of things. No, if we become what MAGA is to beat MAGA, then we have lost.
Right. And that's a big part of it. It's the same thing with the whole the forced deportations to, you know, the El Salvador. Poll numbers show that that's not actually very popular for Trump right now. But people stood up to it before they ever knew that. If I keep coming back to that quote from Hamilton, you know, if you won't stand for anything, what will you fall for? And
that's a good quote.
Yeah, and it's just like we need to say, look, all right, we support trans people. We're also in favor of workers' rights. If you can't say, you know what, I'm not really bothered enough by trans people to look out for my own rights as a worker, you know, you're not going to agree with everything. And that's
Yeah.
what the primaries are for, because you should have an opportunity if you want. I mean, I will not agree with you or support you, but you should, if you're more farther right on social issues, it's a party. You can run somebody, and you can try to win in the primaries. But I don't know enough about what Hogg is doing yet. I want to see what candidates he comes up with. My only issue with that was Democrats who were pearl clutching about he's starting a PAC to go out after his fellow Democrats. Hakeem Jeffries has a PAC to protect incumbents from progressive challengers.
Mm-hmm.
How does him having a PAC to help progressive challengers against incumbents? I just don't see how that's not hypocrisy to say one's great and the other one's not.
Yeah.
I've also looked at past elections. Henry Cuellar in Texas, who is pretty much a Democrat in name only, although I really hate that rhino thing. It's funny. I get called that on Twitter all the time. A rhino.
Oh, you get called a rhino?
Yeah, the fact is, no, I'm actually a Rio because I'm not even in name only, But
you're a repo.
Yeah, exactly. I'm a repo man. But like Cuellar was running against a progressive woman who would have been a great Democrat and really had support and really had a chance to win. But Pelosi and a couple of the other bigwigs put their thumb on the scale for Cuellar. And now he's voting with Trump on legislation. And that's the problem. You get these people in there, and then we find out, maybe they're not quite as, you get your Kirsten Sinema candidates,
Mm-hmm.
Joe Manchin was kind of like, you kind of had to deal with him because there was no way. I actually have a friend who's involved in West Virginia Democratic politics. Manchin was really the only way they could get a seat.
You were not going to get anybody to the left of Manchin and have that seat. That's just a fact. And that seat, if you think about it, if we didn't have Joe Manchin's seat, nothing that Joe Biden got passed would have been passed.
Right.
Because they would have had the Senate.
However, Sinema was not someone where we couldn't have gotten someone who was actually decent in that exact same seat.
Well, she ran on lies.
Yeah, exactly.
She ran to the left of what she was.
Yeah, I remember very well.
Then she decided she was good. She was a banana.
I remember.
I mean, she dressed like a banana, but
I remember one State of the Union address. I did a photo gag where I did Photoshop and put myself in the same outfit as her.
Oh, my goodness.
With a tie, I think. So it was made it look more manly. And I said, "Oh, this is embarrassing."
I wish I had seen that one. So here's something else I'd like to get your thoughts on. I think I use, when we're talking about reaching out to the people on the left, or, people on the left sometimes that are too uncompromising. And you talk about I am for universal health care in some practical, pragmatic way where everybody has health care, whether you call it single payer or Medicare for all or whatever, whether there's also a private insurance option, I'm fine with that. If there is, I think I'm fine with that. If there's not, I just think that healthcare is a right, not a privilege. But there are some people on the left that if you don't call it Medicare for all, if it's not exactly what Bernie's plan is, then you're a sellout. I think that's where sometimes people on the left need to be more, not compromising, but more open-minded. I'm not asking people to compromise their principles and sell out on everybody having health care, but if you're not open-minded, then if it's not called Medicare for all, then it's wrong.
Right, and I get that. One of the things, though, on the other hand, that drives me crazy is, Obamacare. Thank goodness we got it. It has a lot of people, but there were so many compromises made on that bill with Republicans without getting a single Republican vote.
Yeah.
That it's just like, couldn't we have done something better if we weren't going to get any support anyway? You know, and that's the one that kind of drives me a little nuts. I feel like that's just one of those, and it's not the only place in our country where I'm like, okay, we talk
You know,
about
if it makes you feel any better, I was watching an interview with Obama, and they asked him, what was your biggest mistake? And he said trying to work with Republicans, and that if he could do it over again, he would have just jammed Obamacare through the way they were accusing him of when he had the 60 senators. He wouldn't have tried to work with Republicans because he realized they didn't really want to work with him at all.
I have a very controversial take on Obama. I really was inspired by him. There's so much I like about him, but there's an Oprah quality there. And what I mean by an Oprah quality is Oprah's got a wonderful story, very intelligent woman, great speaker, but she gave us Dr. Oz. She gave us Dr. Phil. She just could not bring in good people. And Obama's advisors, like Rahm Emanuel, like Larry Summers, it was just filled with just really not good people. And I really feel like Emanuel, with the head of the DNC, I feel like we went from a 50 state strategy to a 15 state strategy. Mm-hmm. And states that were purple became solid red and have never gone back.
Yeah.
And I feel like
Florida.
Florida, even Iowa, there's, there's just places where this election, some of the farm states actually overperformed a little bit. Kansas on election day, people were like, oh, this is Indiana, Iowa. And what I think it was because of what the effects of those Trump tariffs were the last time around with agricultural products. Mm-hmm. But we have no apparatus to take advantage of that. You know, those are states that we just gave up on. And I mean, it's been this way most of my life, but I really hate that the election map is now, if you're one of these 6 states, your vote counts.
Yeah.
If not, yeah, okay. You know.
And you know what cracks me up about that is people say that like people say that we need to keep the Electoral College because otherwise people in small states votes won't matter. And it's like, no, your vote will matter just as much whether you're living in Wyoming or California. But right now, you've got 75% of the country whose votes don't matter at all because they're just de facto. We already know California is going to go for the Democrat. We know Texas is going to go for the Republican, and we know the Florida is going to go for the Republican. So, like, that's like already you've got like half the country whose votes don't matter. I
mean, right now, it really comes down to between like 6 and 10 states. Mm-hmm. And usually it's really 6 because if you get all the way up to 10, it's going to be a blowout. So, you know.
And those states tend to vote as a block. Like they not like whoever wins one of them wins all of them. Like Trump won all of them in 2016. Biden won all of them in 2020. Trump won all of them in 2024.
Right.
And they're all within, like 100,000 votes.
But I just feel like it would not affect the outcome of too many elections. Obviously, 2016, which we ran about the worst possible campaign that you could run. And 2000, but then you go back a long time before we had a winner. And even like this time, the electoral and the popular matched. I don't think it would be that big an effect, but I do think it would make it a lot, I think it would do away with a lot of the issues.
Well, you know what? I do wonder if in 2024 Harris wouldn't have won the popular vote if it weren't Electoral College. Like, I wonder how many people stay home and don't vote because their vote doesn't matter.
Right.
Like we talk about the Michigan voter who stayed home and didn't vote because of Gaza, but how many people in California didn't vote because they already knew that California was going for Harris regardless of how they voted.
Well, nobody in the 54th. That's for sure.
Just see, not even you. So anyway, I do think you're right on that, and I think right now we need to hear new voices on the Democratic Party. Like we need to right now. I think like you see that 37% are opposed to Trump, but 30% don't like the Democrats.
Right.
Or 30 only. Trump has 37% approval rating. Democrats have 30% approval rating, and 30% is neither.
That is so misread, though, because so many of the people who don't approve of the Democrats, I might actually be in that category.
That's my point. Is 30% that don't agree with the Democrats think that the Democrats aren't doing enough to resist Trump.
Yeah. And I was like and it was funny because watching Republicans like try using that, and I'm like, it's because like people think we aren't mean enough to you. But like it's just when you watch like all the crazy stuff coming out of the Trump administration and the serious threat to our democracy, or a republic, in case any Republicans are listening, then the whole Schumer getting up there with, I sent a strongly worded letter with some really strong questions. It's like, great, thanks so much. You're you got our back there, Chuck.
That'll really help,
And that's
and so many Republican senators voting for even the most are the Democratic senators. Like I can kind of forgive them for voting for Marco Rubio for Secretary of State because his entire life was not dedicated to resisting the State Department. He wasn't the opposite of. How could any Democrat vote for what's his name? The FBI guy. Bug eyes. What? Cash. Like, he literally said he wanted to shut down the FBI.
Right.
Like there's no way that he is qualified to. Peter, Kegbreath. How could you vote for him to be Secretary of Defense? Like not one of them should have. And the traitor, the Russian asset.
Tulsi.
Huh?
Tulsi,
yeah.
He really has to be more specific with this administration.
And then you've got the Secretary of Uneducation, like Linda McMahon. Like none of these people, even like you want to talk about DEI hires and merit, like none of these people were qualified. None of these people had anything close to the qualifications needed. None of these people even knew what the job entailed. Or, but somehow it's not a black guy and it's not somebody that, accepts that transgender people exist. So, they must have merit.
Well, the way I look at it, there's two types of nominations. Like some people are like, oh, you need to impeach every Republican. And it's just like, well, it wouldn't happen. But secondly, I'm not a big fan of some of their politics. I want them voted out of there. But, and I mock her constantly, but I look at someone like Susan Collins.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, her whole life has not been devoted to this. I was a teacher for 25 years. I just retired this past year.
Congrats on that.
Thank you. And she was really, really big on the Social Security Fairness Act, because doing other things all these years, and right now I'm self-employed now, I would not collect any Social Security. I looked at the numbers. It was going to be less than $200 a month if I waited till I was 65. And that was because basically every bit of pension that we got came out of Social Security, even though we made the Social Security payments. Susan Collins was really strong fighting against that. Lisa Murkowski. Yeah, I'd love for her to have more backbone. But there's ones who are just okay. There are opposition, and that's good in this country because I'm in a city that has no opposition, and I know that can lead to a lot of bad things. Sorry for my dogs, but there's such a thing as the loyal opposition, and I look at our Supreme Court. There's I don't like Roberts. I really think he's a terrible Chief Justice. But as far as I'm concerned, he's kind of doing his job for the most part.
Yeah.
Gorsuch and Thomas, on the other hand, are not. And a lot of these hires, it's like that person has no business. I mean, even the last time around, and they always said there were adults to stop Trump. And yeah, the last cabinet was better. But he would purposely take people like Betsy DeVos, who'd spent her whole life fighting against public education, and put her in charge of education. He would get a polluter and put them in charge of the environment, and
putting
so
RFK Jr. in charge of public health.
The only thing that I do think is good about that, now not with the public health, but in a lot of cases, like you said, Kash Patel wanting to I don't. Obviously, there's going to be some very, very bad criminals that are going around. But if Trump tries to use the FBI against his own people, it gives me a lot of more confidence feeling there's a really incompetent boob running that department right now. They've gotten, it's kind of like, and I mean, again, this could really blow up in our face very bad. It's kind of like Stalin with his generals, getting rid of everybody who knew anything about being a general, replacing them with party hacks, and then surprised that the army doesn't work so well. It's kind of like,
the only thing with that is you actually need the FBI to be able to do its job well, to protect us from actual threats.
But I'm wondering if the biggest threat right now isn't actually Trump himself. And the whole thing is, if they're going to be using the apparatus against us, then I like the idea that the apparatus of government isn't going to be working at peak efficiency. On the other hand, there's external threats like measles, where it'd be really nice to have someone able to, say, hey, instead of saying, well, you need to increase the amount of roadkill in your diet, would say, hey,
the man actually murdered a brainworm with his brain. Like, that takes some doing.
I know, God. Oh, man. And that's I think what is going to do in the Trump administration is its own incompetence. And there is one rule of dictatorships that I think people forget. Even though it's not a democratic government, you need to have, I've seen the number as being at least 39% or above 39%. Before it totally forms into like chaos. You need to have at least 60% of your government of the country, at least quasi not fighting you, at least quasi too scared or too supportive of you. And Trump is gonna have a hard time getting to that number.
We have
incompetent dictatorships do not last.
We have a message for you from 3-inch lawyer man here.
Senator,
thank you for representing California 54. You're a champion of the people. So some people appreciate you. Just want you to know.
3-inch lawyer man is one of my favorite Twitter friends. And one of the things I love about him is that picture of William Conrad as cannon on the ground. I did my first open mic a week ago. And I wore my big William Conrad t-shirt on stage, knowing that nobody there is old enough to remember a cannon. So
explain that to those who don't know what all that is.
Okay, I have a big thing for 70s detectives. That's where a lot of my book Detective Jesus comes from, is my love of those kind of cheesy detective shows. And William, like every detective had to have a gimmick. Barnaby Jones was the old detective, and Ironside was the disabled detective, and Cannon was the fat detective. And I loved the whole premise of that show. One of my first jobs out of college was working at this tiny, what they used to call UHF station in Chicago. And we aired, our ratings weren't bad, but our shows were totally for men over 55, which is a demographic I'm really appreciating now. It was like our Tuesday night lineup was Matlock at 5:00. In the heat of the night at 6:00.
That was a good show.
7:00 was another Matlock, and 9:00. No, I'm sorry. 7:00 was a 2-hour Matlock movie, and 9:00 was another episode of Matlock. So you kind of see the theme here, and I must have watched every episode of Matlock there, and he also had like the best opening 5 minutes of a series, where the police detective comes to visit him in his penthouse. He is doing target practice on his balcony, showing what a crack shot he is. He's just been doing martial arts, showing that he's a really martial artist, and eating a gourmet meal as he talks to the detective. And it's just
this is Matlock?
No, this is Cannon.
Cannon.
And
okay.
I'm like, so that's how I just became a big fan of that. And I
don't think I've ever seen an episode of Cannon. I'll have to give it. All right. So as long as we're just totally on Segway Center here.
That is totally a segue.
Have you watched Poker Face? Which is, to me, like basically a reboot of Columbo, and just magnificently done. And it's coming back tomorrow.
I know it's coming back tomorrow. I've heard nothing but wonderful things about it. The actress who's the main character in there, I loved her.
She's also the executive producer, by the way.
Oh, I didn't notice that. I loved her in Orange is the New Black. So I have every reason to watch it, and I have not seen it yet. It's definitely on my to-watch list. I'm aware of this show. But yeah, she was. I loved Orange.
Even like the opening credits and stuff, the fonts that they use are from Columbo. And she does just one more thing. It's so well done. Like, if you like Columbo, you will love Poker Face. It is, and Columbo to me is like the archetype detective. Like it is, all detective shows since then have been trying to, or have that all the good ones anyway, have this kind of, formula that Columbo had. And I'm a big detective show fan, and so I'm surprised now that I'm thinking about it that I haven't watched Cannon at all. But yeah, I'll have to give it a shot if I can find it, if it's streaming somewhere.
It used to be on UTV all the time for free, but I don't know if it still is, because I don't have that anymore, because I switched to YouTube TV. But yeah,
you've got to give it a shot. I've been rewatching the first season just to get ready for tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm kind of between shows now. I did promise a friend I would watch The IT Crowd. I really liked what I watched, but my problem is the creator of that show, who shares my last name, actually is really, really anti-trans and anti a bunch of other things, I believe, in spoken. And I'm like, meh. But then the show's been pretty good, and it's one of those things, as a Van Morrison fan, I really do try to do, which is separate the creator from the art.
Yeah,
especially when there's something like a television show where literally hundreds of people are going into the production. That's one of the things that always irritates me. Let's try to bring it.
Three of my favorite artists are Van Morrison, Eric Clapton, and Meatloaf. So,
wow, yeah.
Like, if I just I just not like music anymore.
Right. But that actually brings up one of my things, like the Amazon boycotts.
Mm-hmm.
On the one hand, I totally support it, and on the other hand, I look at myself and wonder how many people there are like me, who is partly dependent on my Amazon income. And I'm like,
Because your
anytime
book is
yeah. So anytime you're boycotting one of these places, how many little people are you hurting? And like, I've got the book up in other places, but on Barnes and Noble, I've probably sold 2% of the number I've sold on Amazon.
wow.
Yeah, maybe, maybe that high. So yeah, it's really, you can say go to other places, but then, yeah, it's just,
And then there's people that started their Amazon stores long before 2024.
right.
Like I look at and then there's like the drivers, there's the people that work in the warehouse, like people whose jobs are not political. They they didn't they didn't go, oh, Jeff Bezos didn't stop them from endorsing the president, I'm going to go work for him. Like they just are trying, and these are the people that are going to be the first hit, the hardest hit.
Right.
These are the people who's so I'm with you. I don't think that Jeff Bezos, no matter how effective your boycott is, he's not going to skip a meal or like miss out on he's not going to be able to not afford to put butter on his toast because he's not going to suffer. Other people are going to suffer because
like
of the boycott. You might affect his net worth, but you won't affect his life.
Well, like I said, I'm not saying don't boycott. I'm just like, how do we make something like that work? Where because the same thing. I always like see these like buy local.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So if instead of ordering something, online, you go to a big chain in your community
Mm-hmm.
who's headquartered who knows where, is that still buying local? And it's just some of these things make really good slogans, but I'd like to see more like how do we deal with everything else with it kind of thing.
And sometimes buying local means you have to spend a lot more money that you don't have to spend.
Right.
Or, like in my case, I live in Elgin, Texas, population 14,000. So that means either I have to drive into Austin, and just to drive there and back, it's an hour drive. Well, it's a 30-minute drive there and a 30-minute drive back if there's no traffic.
Right.
To, like that's not necessary. Like not everything I need to buy is there. Most of what I can buy local is at the local Walmart, which is no different than buying at Amazon. Like there's, and I just, like I personally, I'm kind of with you. I don't tell people don't boycott, but I don't participate in boycotts because I personally don't feel that boycotts hurt the people they're intended to hurt. They hurt people that they're not intended to hurt.
Yeah, I have participated. I still boycott Coke products or Koch, Koch.
Oh,
Not Coca-Cola, but Coke, because like, okay, I don't need to buy their paper towels. I can get another brand just as good, and vote with my wallet. When I do eat local, I'm in a very very cop heavy area. Really, I'm not an all cops are bad person, but I do have a problem with some cops. And one thing I do have a problem with is I really hate the thin blue line flag. I feel it's like a mockery of a whole lot of things, and especially because but if I see a place that has like that kind of stuff in the window, trying to draw more cops to eat there, I will generally take my business elsewhere because it's like it's not really my crowd, So, and like I said, I have friends who are cops. I'm not an all cops are bad person, but I have an issue with propaganda too.
Yeah. So that like I feel like these things are like a personal choice. Like sometimes I feel like people condemn you if you're not participating in their boycott, like on Facebook or whatever. And it's like these are things that people have to make a choice to do.
Right. There's a great podcast that I really enjoyed listening called History That Doesn't Suck. And it's just really well done and really interesting as they go through American history.
Mhm.
And they had a great episode on the Boston Tea Party. And they were able to like kind of talk about like how this affected merchants, how this,
Oh,
there was
that's
one guy who was just going to go like bankrupt who supported the revolution, or not the revolution at that point, but it supported the rebels, and like how to, and they were gonna burn everything up if he didn't go along with it. They were gonna torch his place, and if he did go along with it, the British were going. It was like he was just caught between a rock and a hard place,
Mhm.
and having him try to navigate, and it just showed like how various people, and that's like the side you never ever, I never encountered in history books before, and having been a social studies teacher, I've read a lot of history books.
I studied history in college, and I kind of developed this hobby where whatever period we were going through in American history, I would just go to the library and just for kicks, I'd maybe, spend like an hour. I'd go back into the what do they call those microfiche?
Oh, I loved microfiche. That was fun.
I'd go back to the opinion pages of the newspapers, and I'd read through the letters to the editor from each period, like for World War One, and and it was almost like I'd say almost like having access to Twitter back then,
Right.
where you're reading the man on the street's opinion of things, and like what they were getting, and of course these were all filtered by the editor, but at least you got some idea. This is what just the average dude was thinking about these things.
Yeah.
And it really kind of opens up your perspective beyond just the scholastic interpretation of things. Like I remember reading one about World War One, about how the Germans were a bunch of baby killers, and it was just, and this was World War One, not World War Two, where the Germans were made out to be a lot more evil than they were, probably.
Right.
There was a lot of propaganda around World War One that we don't talk about.
Oh yeah, I was actually just going over some of the Zimmerman letter and some of that the other day. But one of the things that I was trying to do as a teacher was I really tried to give people as good a view of like what everyday life was like for people, and
That's
like
great.
who were because I remember one of the most interesting reactions I had from students. I found like a 5-minute clip from some like colonial reenactors, just showing no nudity, I promise. I wasn't showing them nudity, but how they got dressed in the morning. And even the guys, the number of layers that they were wearing, my students were just slack-jawed and like, how did they live like that? And just kind of like showing like, this is what your life was like. This is, and, even things like I'm addicted to a couple of YouTube channels. One's Townsend's, and another is Tasting History, and they basically take recipes through history.
Oh yeah.
Learn a lot about the history from that time.
Yeah.
And like Townsend's just like 18th century cooking, and I remember he went to Mount Vernon and he made George Washington's favorite dessert, which was called Orange Fool, and he got lambasted by all the Trump supporters, who thought it was somehow a slam on Trump because it was called Orange Fool. And this guy was like the least political person. He just was like near tears. You could just see. And I felt so bad for him because he did not try to do anything into politics. And all the Trump supporters just thought, Orange Fool, are you talking about Trump?
It's funny that you would say the Orange Fool, and their mind immediately goes to Trump.
Right.
They're telling on themselves, right?
Exactly. But yeah, I find the history of everyday people way more interesting than the history of famous people. I'm writing a book right now, follow up to Detective Jesus, called President Lightning, which is about President Roosevelt running in the 1936 Olympics. And he's visited by Fala, his time traveling dog, who, I decided I really wanted to use
running, like physically running, or
Yeah.
running for office.
Yes, physically running.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Which is not usually so. FDR is running in the Olympics.
Right. Thanks to the help of Herbert Hoover, Herbert Hoover was very big into physical fitness and exercise. He invented a sport called Hoover ball, which basically was like volleyball with a medicine ball, which sounds like a great way to break digits. And he came up with a way to increase the speed of someone, the power of someone's reflexes. Unfortunately, would kill a normal man. FDR, having Guillain-Barré syndrome, Guillain-Barré, I can never remember how to pronounce it. People think it's polio, but that's not actually what he had. It weakens your reflexes. He could actually take it. So I won't give anything away, but Jesse Owens gets kidnapped. They can't find anybody to take his place. FDR runs in his place. And that is using this incredible technology. And of course, he learns how to pull himself up by his own bootstraps. So there's no New Deal. Hoover teaches him that. And everybody's happy in the end. I'm trying to write in the voice of Jack Kimble, which always makes it a little bit different. But the reason I mentioned this is I was trying to research.
So Jack Kimble wrote this book, not you.
Yeah. So Fala appears at Roosevelt's bedroom window. And it suddenly occurs to me, okay, I know FDR can walk a little bit with pain. If somebody appeared at his window, would he get in the wheelchair or would he just walk the 10 feet? And I'm like researching how far could he walk without pain? And then I'm like, well, wait a sec. What floor would Roosevelt's bedroom be in of the White House? Because it's got multiple floors. It was the second floor. It is conceivable that a Scottish Terrier could, with luck, make it up to the second floor. So it was just like the weird things that you research writing this stuff for such a bizarre book,
Here's a funny story for you. My brother he's a literature major.
Mm-hmm.
He's got his master's in literature, one of his masters in literature, and his bachelor's in literature, or in English. And his senior, or his what should we call it? Like for his bachelor's degree, you have to do the thesis paper. So his thesis paper was a short story about what was it? A cat and a cow, or something like that. I can't remember what it was, but he writes the whole story. It's all illustrated and everything, and he shows it to a friend of his, and his friend like reads it. He's like, "Oh, this is really good," and he's like, "But one thing, you're calling the cow a he all through the book."
Oh yeah.
And Curtis is like, "No." So he had to go through and change the whole thing so that the cow is,
I can totally see that. Yeah. I am not really prolific. My last book came out in 2022, and the one before that came out in 2013. But I'm making a lot of my money now doing writing on the side. And so I'm like, okay, well, I'm just going to take May off from everything else and just focus on getting this story done.
That sounds like a fun book.
I have to top Detective Jesus, which I really liked. I just didn't think I had another book of Jesus jokes in it. And it's one of the nice things about the Kimble account taking off is I sold more books pretty much every month for the last 2 years than I did every month that book came out, except for the very first one. And I've had like 6 or 7 months that sold more than the first month that came out in the last 2 years. So as the Kimble account has taken off, the books have sold a little more, which is nice. I mean, I've made enough to be a thousandaire, but it's not.
Don't spend it all in one place.
Exactly. But
So I have a question for you as a social studies teacher. Here is an idea I've had that I think we could use as a society. And did you teach high school or
I taught middle school.
middle school? Okay. So my idea is you have to you don't have to take, but there's like the equivalent of a civics test, or that a high school student has to pass for their final exam.
Right.
That is just very understanding how the government works. And
middle school has that. The 8th grade graduation also has pretty much. A lot of schools actually use the same test. It's the Constitution test.
So you have to pass that test. Like, you take that test. You don't have to run for office, though. You ask every candidate to take that test and then publish their scores, which would be totally voluntary. But you'd have to actually, not you'd have to, but there would be some way that people could look and say, do you actually understand how the government works? Which would be, to me, something that you should know if you're going to be a part of the government. So like Lauren Boebert would have to say, I got a 58 on this test. Like, yeah, and you could go, objectively, like, this woman actually has no idea how government works.
Right.
Maybe she should not be my representative.
Well,
not to vote. So it's not like, Jim Crow laws or anything, but to run for office, you take this test and you publish your score.
I just have that feeling it would be like income taxes or things where the people that you'd already want to vote for would publish their scores and the people you wouldn't want to vote for wouldn't. Constitution was actually one of my favorite things to teach, except it really started getting annoying when well, okay, this is how it's supposed to work, but it really doesn't, And there was a really good video game that Sandra Day O'Connor and a Democrat made together that had a bunch of like social studies games, and their Constitution games were the best.
So here's a story for you. When I was in high school, my dad was a diplomat, and he was serving in Liberia, and I was working for the high school newspaper. And so I started this thing where I would interview all the senior officers at the embassy. There was a political officer, his name was Marshall McCauley. And this was in 1980, there was a coup in Liberia where a man named Samuel Canyon Doe overthrew the government. And then he was overthrown in 1986. But this was like 1983. So I like to say I was there between coups. And he was helping Liberia write its first constitution. And it's still the constitution that they have. And so, I just thought that was really interesting. I was like, what's it like to write a constitution? Do you feel like, the founding fathers must have felt? And he's, and I was like, what, are you just going to basically use the American Constitution? And he asked me this question. He said, do you think the Constitution is perfect? And would you, if you were writing the Constitution today, the American Constitution, would it be exactly the same as what we have? And, I thought about things like, the what is it? The 3/5 compromise and, the electoral college. And I was like, I don't think I would. And then he said, well, what would your constitution look like? If you were going to establish a new constitution, a new government, what would it look like? And this was almost 40 years ago that I had this conversation, and I have not stopped thinking about that question since then. I think this is a question that maybe every voter should ask themselves. And, what is the role of government? What should government do? You can't say government is too big without first defining what government is. And you can't say it's too small without. So if you were writing a constitution, what, as somebody that's taught social studies your whole life, what would be to you, what would be the most essential parts of it? What would you write?
Okay. So I think we're probably getting a little more knowledge the hard way right now. So first off, I would say that One of the things that we made a big mistake in when we went into Iraq and Afghanistan and tried to give them governments like us was we tried to establish democracies without having a framework for a democracy. And one of the things that our colonies had before they became a republic was we had newspapers, we had a free press. I mean, one of the things I always, when we're talking about due process, like with, which has come up in the news lately, I keep thinking of is John Adams, who everybody hated. The vice president's whole position got changed just so people could shut John up. He really rubbed people the wrong way. But he cared enough about due process to defend the British soldiers who were accused of the Boston Massacre and sent them on their way. So obviously, I believe due process is important. Freedom of the press and an independent press is really, really important. I would also say, and this is something I never thought would be a problem, and the founders had a way, and it worked forever. It's not working anymore. Is just the whole idea of checks and balances. The whole idea that, whoa, if you're trying to put somebody crazy through, your own party is not going to save you because they're going to see this person and go, no, they're just not right. And not having checks and balances. I wonder if some of the recent Supreme Court justices, decisions can ever go back in the tube, the toothpaste tube, because like we've taken so many checks off the president now. But yeah, I mean,
like he can commit crimes now as long as he says he's doing his job.
Right. Exactly. And I wonder, I just think without having a free flow of information, how can you hope to have people vote when they don't have any understanding of the issues? So that's really important. I mean, I will go back, if I had to yank out two Supreme Court justice decisions that I wish had never happened. One would be Citizens United. And just a way to stop people from buying the democracy would be really, really helpful. And then, I wouldn't, the last one, what we were just talking about, which, it's an official action. But I guess, I mean, what I believe is if you're going to have a democracy or even, limited democracy or a republic, you need to have people able to understand what's going on and make a decision on it. And right now, that's not what we have. There's this thing people love doing with this, finding Trump supporters regretting their vote. And there's a part of me that totally understands this and gets this. And after the election, I was taking great delight in this. But then there was this woman on YouTube who realized that her children's and her were both in different programs that were being completely cut off by the government. She didn't know what she was going to do. She was hyperventilating and had to stop her video because she was just about to faint. And people lambasted her, white Southern women, this is what you get for voting for Trump. You should have known better, blah, blah. Her whole TikTok stream was filled with her saying, we can't vote for Trump. He's going to do all these horrible things. And her and her kids going out and rallying for Harris. And no one wanted to look at that. They just wanted to blame her. Oh, you Trumper, you get. And I realized there was just a feeding frenzy. And yeah, like I said, there's a third of the population that's never going to learn. And if I can't help laughing when things blow up for them.
That's one thing I can't, the whole dogpiling nature of social media.
Right. Yeah.
And there's part of me the whole why did the leopard eat my face? Like I get the Schadenfreude of it, and like I've even written a song about it, but there's also like I do kind of like there was this lady that her husband she met her husband was brought over here as an infant, and he's but he's undocumented. I don't know why he's not part of DACA, but apparently he's not part of DACA, and she's worried like apparently they're going to deport him, and so she's going to be just left with her and her children. And he's the father, so these children aren't going to have their father. She's not going to have her husband, and she voted for she voted for Trump, and she's like, I still wonder if I should have voted. She hasn't even abandoned Trump yet, and she's like, but this isn't what we voted for.
Right.
And then people are like, well, that is, and it's like I understand the Schadenfreude of that, but I also kind of part of me goes, this is still a real person.
Right.
That her life is still going to be destroyed. Her children still aren't going to have a father. And, yes, like on the one hand, she was happy when it was other people and she's not happy when it's herself. But it's still happening to her. And so I don't know. At what point do we have mercy and stop dogpiling?
I think part of it is feel MAGA is like a pyramid scheme. People are taking advantage of gullible people and making themselves wealthy and powerful. And those people, I have no sympathy for. The leopards can not just eat their face, the leopards can keep going. But then there are the people who didn't buy in at the beginning. The people who were stupid or uninformed or had two people giving them compelling cases and listened to both sides. Because let's face it, no matter what Trump's actual motives, whatever their actual motives are, they didn't come out and say it that way. It's the same way they still don't. Exactly. They're not deporting innocent people to El Salvador. They're deporting horrible, horrible gang members. And if you just happen to believe them, then, and it's like, yeah, you want people to have more information. So we need to counteract that information. And we don't interact that confirmation by being gleeful that they met with some misfortune. Like I said, the ringleaders, yeah, keep going, leopards. Don't stop at the face. All of the people who are just dumb or uninformed or listen to the wrong person, they need a chance. I mean, I'm going to tell you now, I was a Republican. I was a Republican until 2003. I was born in 1968, so I was a Republican for the first 35 years of my life. And because my family was Republican. And when now none of my siblings are, which is kind of funny. Now, when I hit 35, it was funny because at this time, I didn't even know very many gay people at all, and I wasn't close with any of them. But the country was starting to really fall apart in a lot of ways, and the war wasn't going well. The economy was starting to show signs of weakness and everything. And George Bush was going to be making an important speech that night, and that speech was about. He didn't find out until later. Was about gay marriage, and it just suddenly like a light bulb went off. Like, this is red meat that's just totally supposed to deflect from the real problems that are going on. Mm-hmm. Instead, have everybody focused on gay people who aren't really doing anything to hurt anybody. And it was like that light bulb, and suddenly I became a liberal. Now, teaching in the Chicago public schools did a lot to like, oh, that's why these students don't have the right school supplies or the right clothes or, wearing a hoodie in 20-degree weather in Chicago. But it takes a while until that sets in. And I will tell you, if you've ever met someone who used to be an alcoholic who got themselves sober, no one will ever tell you more against alcohol. And if you meet someone who was a heavy smoker who quit, no one will ever. You will never find anybody more against cigarettes.
Yeah.
And if you ever find a converted Republican, no one will ever be against that so much. I always say, that in the 20th century, there were two transformational candidates. One, or I should say 100 years when I said it. One was FDR, who created a generation of Democrats, and George W. Bush, who created a generation of Democrats. Obviously not a generation. It certainly didn't last that long.
What about, wouldn't you say Reagan created a generation of Republicans? Like literally our generation? Gen X is majority Republican, and it has a lot to do with Reagan.
I said this a while back, and I was saying it was when it was right when George Bush was president. I could make a case for that, but I think it's one of the first examples. Okay, Reagan gets
I do not like Reagan, just to be clear.
Oh, no. Reagan gets a lot of blame for wrecking the economy. He just was continuing it. It really starts in the 70s. If you look at the graphs, you can see it. But being anti-worker and some of the policies he put in that still haunt us today.
Well, like busting up the air traffic controllers unit. Sure. That was like one of the monumental shifts in the history of our country that people don't talk about.
Yeah, for sure. And you know what? They endorsed him. Talking about leopards eating your face. But the there are just a lot of people who are just uninformed about that. And the 80s was just such an optimistic time period where people were able to shove all the problems that were happening in the rest of the world out. I mean, we had all sorts of issues with Middle East instability. We were funding death squads in Central and South America. There was a lot of bad. The Cold War was raging. There was just a lot of bad stuff going on. But in America, it was a new morning. It was like 1950s, and things were so optimistic. And I think we, as we got older, a lot of us learned, and others of us are still, I want to go back to that time,
Have you seen the TV series The Americans?
Oh, yeah. I still have not finished it, but I've watched all but the last 6 episodes. And I
need to watch the last season myself.
It's so dark, though. It's hard to go back and watch. Although I think
that show really captures what you're talking about. Like the whole America is perfect, and it's saving, that wholeness. That was really
and it's funny because the 80s were a generation of nostalgia. And it was a time period of nostalgia. And at the same time, that was when I was born in 68. So 13 through 23. So of course I'm nostalgic for those years in my own life.
I was born in 67, so we're basically the same.
Yeah, so it's like I'm nostalgic for a time period that was all about nostalgia.
Yeah. And it's weird to talk about living in an era of the 80s. I was about to say the same thing, but it's so weird to think of nostalgia for a time period during the time period, but there was that. It was kind of like that was everybody was just nostalgic for the 80s in the 80s.
Right. Well, I mean, it's like when I look at what was big in the 80s, what was when you look at our big movies, Back to the Future ranks really high up there.
Mm-hmm.
It felt like every single month, someplace near me was opening up another 50s diner or hamburger place. You've got bands making the top 40 like the Stray Cats.
Yeah.
And then by the end of the period, when Harry Met Sally comes out, and all of a sudden Big Band gets huge again. There's just a lot of these so much of what we loved in the 80s was nostalgia for another time period,
It was all just a celebrate. I would say it was the peak of American exceptionalism was the 80s.
Right.
And so it was everything from every era that was great. We uplifted, and everything that was wrong we ignored. We pretended like racism had just disappeared, even though it was just as prevalent as ever, because at least we didn't have Jim Crow laws anymore. Like, America was just the greatest country in the history of the world, and that was it. And how dare you question it if you ever, said anything negative about it?
Right. And I mean, the thing is, it's like AIDS was killing huge numbers of people. And yeah, whatever. I was actually just thinking yesterday, I was really starting to miss the best teacher I ever had in comedy, an improvisation teacher who taught everybody from Chris Farley to David Mamet, but still found time for, me. And he was probably the first gay person who ever I kind of got, felt some kind of like, wow, this is like such an important person in my life, such a mentor. And he was very private. And a couple of years in the mid 90s, I found out, he died. And when they listed the cause of death as pneumonia, it's like, I bet that was AIDS. And, sure enough, I found out later it was. And, he'd been living with it for some time. And I'm like, if he had made it a few more years longer, the drugs got so much better for that. But he was, just another person who died at 52 because, of, this thing that we really didn't care too much about.
Yeah. We were much more concerned about gay people than like when in 1986 I joined the Air Force. I was in the Air Force from 86 to 90, and about 89 I got sent to Italy. And while I was in Italy, there was a group of gay people, like gays and lesbians, that all kind of hung out together, and I was friends with a lot of them. I'm straight. I don't have any problems with gay people, and they were just friends of mine, right?
Sorry about that.
But one of them thought, because I was friends with a lot of gay people, like maybe kind of misread his radar, thought I was gay, asked me if I wanted to go on a date sometimes. I was like, sorry, I'm straight, no offense. And he's like, don't worry. And then like a couple of weeks later, another one asked me if I wanted to go out. And I said, I'm not gay, but, Cordell is, like maybe you should go talk to Cordell. And then the next day, the OSI, the Office of Special Investigations, which is like the Air Force, AFOSI is like the NCIS of the Air Force.
Right.
They had been running a sting operation to bust the gays. Because this was like before even Don't Ask, Don't Tell. This is when you could go to prison for being gay in the military. So he comes and so the next day I get summoned to the OSI, and the guy that had, hit on me before the night before was an undercover OSI guy pretending to be gay. And he's like, well, last night you told me about this and blah, blah, blah. We want you to write everything down. We want you to testify against all the gays. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. And so then after that, like, they kept trying to amp up the pressure on me. And in the Air Force, if you make a mistake, like, they'll give you like the most minor form of discipline is a letter of counseling.
Right. And
if you get 3 letters of counseling, then they can give you a letter of reprimand. And if you get 3 letters of reprimand, they can give you an Article 15. If they give you an Article 15, then they can kick you out. So they started. I got a letter of counseling for making a typo. I got a letter of counseling for having too much in an inspection. They found dust on my service cap, and so like mistakes on this level, they were just anything at all they could find, they would give me a letter of counseling for, and then those became letter of reprimands, and eventually I got an Article 15, and they kicked me out of the Air Force because I wouldn't testify against the gays. And at any time I could have ended it by testifying against the gays, but I wasn't going to, destroy their lives to protect, that. But like, that's where we were at with gay people in the 90s and 80s. And, like, even like when Don't Ask, Don't Tell came along, to me, that was a huge a victory for gay rights.
Yeah.
And it became like, then when Obama ended Don't Ask, Don't Tell, that was a victory. But we needed that stepping stone to where at least you weren't actively investigating people for being gay. You weren't running sting operations against the gays. Like, that was Anyway, like I think we lose sight of how much progress we've made on those things, and
Right.
and we need to think of
Right.
those things when it comes to like trans rights now. Like
Yeah.
anyway,
I
sorry, I
agree.
didn't mean for the
I
digression,
think,
but
no,
like
no, I think,
sorry.
no, I didn't mean to talk over you. Sorry. I think Pete Hegseth is going to bring back don't ask, don't tell. Actually, only it's going to be about, do you want another drink? Not going to ask him that question. He's not going to tell. They're just going to pour. Oh boy. Hope our military isn't needed for 4 years. But again, if I gotta think if they are, and I actually have some faith in the military. I know they're purging pretty hard right now. But I have some faith. It's actually for the last few years. It's actually been a fairly progressive organization, honestly. And I think that's definitely going in the opposite direction now. But
even so, like when I was in basic training, here's a great story for. When I was in basic training, they had you had like your locker was in two parts. There was like the upper part where you kept all your uniforms and stuff, and then you had the bottom part, and your bottom part was where you kept your personal stuff, and you had a lock that they could put on that. They could inspect the top part and it had to be like all perfect. The bottom part, they couldn't open that up and if you had your lock on it, and they couldn't make you unlock it. Like it was 100% private. The guy in the locker next to me left his unlocked. If they left it unlocked, then they could open it up and see,
right.
And like people, if they left it unlocked, they'd come back and the stuff would be dumped out all over their bed and stuff. Well, this one guy had written these like racist screeds home, like how they were upset that he was upset that he had to share a bunk with an N-word. And although he didn't say N-word,
right.
he said, anyway, and it just did this racist screed. And so he was walking past what we called the snake pit, which was when we had meals in the dining hall. There was this one long table all the training instructors would sit at.
Ooh.
All the black training instructors were sitting there waiting for him. And he starts walking past the snake pit and they say, "Airman, come over here." And so then they started reading this letter out loud to him. And they, am I an N-word? Go on, call me one, call me. And they berated him for about half an hour, started proceedings to kick him out of the Air Force. He spent the next week scraping up bird shit off the parade grounds with his toothbrush. Like that was how he spent his last week in the Air Force. And so like nowadays they would just be like, see, this is DEI, as though like the military had not started anti-racist until after, until Joe Biden became president. Military has been this way for a long time. It was that way while I was in the 80s.
Yeah. And one of the things too, I think that some of these red states are going to run into is if abortion is firmly entrenched as a state's issue, you're not going to be able to recruit young women, and in some cases young men, when they might get sent to a red state and where they've been fighting against allowing people to leave for medical, because that was one of the, there was an issue with that. They're going to have to move military bases to states that do have abortion and other services, and I think it's going to cost them money. And I think you're going to see the same thing with businesses, where if we want the best people to come work for us, they don't want to live in Alabama. We need to go somewhere else.
And you know what else it's going to start doing is there's already a nursing shortage and a doctor shortage.
Right.
And doctors and nurses, especially that specialize in OBGYN, are now they're not wanting to go to those states. So hospitals are starting to have to close down.
Right.
Or they just don't have OBGYN doctors there anymore. So it's like like these things are going to be killing these red states.
Oh yeah. There's just no way. I mean, and that's true. I mean, when you don't get so here's the big catch-22 though. So getting OBGYN care becomes really difficult in these states, which are the same states that will prosecute a woman if she has a miscarriage.
Mm-hmm.
So you make it much harder to get prenatal care. And then if something goes wrong, you blame her. That's not going to end well for anybody.
No, it's horrible. I actually live in Texas where this is happening. So.
I have a friend whose son is just starting as a nurse in Lubbock, so right at the heart of all the measles and everything. And yeah, they managed to avoid COVID up until like 2 months ago, and they both have reasons they should not be getting COVID, but they he's looking now. He's just graduating this week, and he's looking at like being, how much they pay travel nurses now. And that's one of the things too. You can't, you've got this small group of people making huge bucks traveling around. That just, hurting I mean, we talked about this earlier, but our medical system, I just don't believe we can't look at all the countries in the world. And of course, there's money that will stop us from doing this, but we can't look at all the other countries in the world who have medical systems and say, okay, what are the best parts of each of these countries? And that's, that's the thing. There's just, I've just noticed we have such, because of insurance, there's such a focus on catastrophic illness and not on preventing catastrophic illnesses.
Yeah.
Anything that, is going to like help you prevent something bad happening, they don't want to pay for. They want to just wait and pay for the really expensive operation when something does happen. And that,
because there's no money in preventing illness.
Right. Exactly.
So are you in Chicago or California?
I'm in Chicago. Okay. So
Jack's in California, you're in Chicago.
Right. When I created Jack, I had no real desire to be from any particular place, but I was trying to create a fictional representative, and I thought, California's got so many, no one's going to notice another one. If I was in, trying to think of a really tiny state, Wyoming's 2nd congressional district, I'd be like, hey, Wyoming only has one representative. There is no second. But if you're saying, oh, I'm in the 54th instead of the 53rd, okay, fine, whatever. Now it went down to 52, so that's why I've been telling people I was grandfathered in. Because
so, where in Chicago are you? Because I lived in Chicago for 15 years.
I'm in the part of Chicago I call West Indiana. It's the Trump corner of Chicago. I'm in the area of Mount Greenwood. So
okay.
Find a map of how the city voted, and you will find us in the one little red corner.
I used to live in the Irving Park area.
Okay, I actually would like to move out towards Oak Park.
Okay.
When I was a teacher, I had to live in Chicago. My mom was living in assisted living, and when I bought my house, and I wanted a place where I could be close to her. And also had to live in Chicago. So that's when I bought this place. But and I've got some really great neighbors. I don't quite fit in the vibe of this neighbor. There's another neighborhood I used to live in called Beverly, which, even though it's really close, is really a cool story. It was actually the first successfully integrated neighborhood south side of Chicago. Literally, anytime black people moved in, white people moved out, and there was redlining and real estate agents trying to take advantage of this. And one day in a church basement, an advertising exec gave a slideshow presentation about how we need to welcome newcomers into the neighborhood. And I mean, partly, and one of the reasons he's able to convince people is, it's way better for your home value, for one thing. If you're not, everybody in your neighborhood isn't a motivated seller. And so they really welcome people in, and it's a really nice area. It's got a lot of cool things to walk to. And there's still, it's I love that neighborhood, and I didn't realize moving like one neighborhood to the west was going to kind of change things, and I like wound up in a very Trumpian area. So
what I miss the most about Chicago is the food.
Oh yeah,
like not like I miss. Like people don't understand. Like if you've never lived in Chicago or been to Chicago, you probably don't know this, but you basically, to get franchise food, you almost have to go out to the suburbs. Like there are so many just brilliant mom and pop shops, from like Greek food and Italian food and German food and Polish food and Mexican food and Cuban food, and like within your walking distance you can probably find 6 or 7 restaurants from 6 or 7 different cultures that are just out of this world.
Every great food city I've ever been in has been a really international city. Toronto, it's a really underrated food city.
Yeah, it is.
I remember things like piri piri chicken. What the heck is that? It's like, oh, they've got a huge Portuguese immigrant population, and it's like, oh, okay, I've never heard of this before. And so I'm like, yeah, there was just a lot of great international cities because you get that cultural melting pot here too. And I kind of laughed. There used to be a show on Fox called Chicago Code that I kind of used to watch for all the wrong reasons. There was a big Irish gang that was terrorizing the city, and they all looked like Southies with red hair and like the newsboy caps. And I'm like, I think Al Capone killed them like 90 years ago. I think that's what happened to that gang. And but they would always be like, hey, what do you want to do for lunch? You want to get Italian beef, or you want to get a sausage or a deep dish pizza? And it's like, that's not how people in Chicago eat. It's like you can kind of tell when a show is made by people in California saying, let's set it in Chicago because that sounds gritty, and there is just everything here. And I even in the suburbs, there's a really good pho place by me. There's just different, cuisines that like we're not all eating, Italian beef, which there's nothing wrong, especially at 2 a.m.
I miss Italian beef so much. Yeah. Italian beef is Italian beef is like one of those foods that you don't know exists unless you've been to Chicago.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's not 100%, but a lot of people would just like never heard of Italian beef, and I'd be like, I got to take it I was a campus minister at the time, and I spent a lot of time at UIC, so I'd always take people to Al's. I don't know if you've ever been.
My favorite, yeah.
I mean,
it's funny because I never liked Italian beef until I found religion and learned you had to baptize the beef. I would just eat the dry beef.
There's no other way to eat it.
I'd eat the dry beef on the bun, and it's like, this is very dry. But when you dunk it, okay, now
it's got to be dipped. It's got to be dipped.
Yeah. So.
And got to have the jardinara on there.
Yeah. I mean, that was one of
you gotta have it like to where it's too spicy to keep eating and too delicious to not keep eating. It's like if you're not sweating, it's not done right.
I got this really, really level of like spice where I love it, and then when it goes above that, I can't take it. There's a place in Indianapolis called St. Elmo's that is known for their shrimp cocktail. All my friends love it. I just feel like my whole brain is on fire. I'm like, But like, there's other spicy food I like, and I think it's because it's made with horseradish instead of peppers. It might be what
Yeah.
type of spice it is. But I'll be like, this is great, this is great, this is great. Oh no, that's terrible. Just I have to find just that right level. I like just that little sweat dripping down my forehead.
I think I like it where it's just to the point of unbearable. Like if you go past the point of unbearable, then it's unbearable. But like you've got to get, like, if you're sitting there just eating like 3 or 4 bites in a row without suffering, then it's not hot enough. It's there has to be some level of pain involved. Otherwise, it's
Yeah,
anyway.
I just never, I don't like it when you can just taste heat.
Yeah,
I want to enjoy the food too. But it's funny because I mean, teaching at a school which was 95% Mexican, and before that I taught at a school that was 90% Mexican. The level of heat, because before that I taught for like a year in the suburbs, and it's like the difference between, we just want cheese on our pizza because we have like 2 pizza parties a year, one at Christmas and one at the end of the year. And it's just like, by the end of the year, it's like, can you get like quadruple jalapeno? It's like,
cheese
pepper.
I always say cheese pizza, like just cheese pizza. It's just an open-faced grilled cheese sandwich. It's not. Yeah. It's not pizza.
Although I went through this weird period during COVID where I just suddenly discovered I don't like pepperoni. And so I've eaten more cheese pizza. The thing is, in Chicago, I feel it's like sausage was probably more prevalent topping than pepperoni. And it's now kind of switched a little bit, but it's still a really large chunk of Chicago is still sausage, not pepperoni.
Who makes a good, like when we talk about Chicago pizza, I think people that aren't in Chicago always just think deep dish, when deep dish is great. Yeah. But I think that like regular pizza, like just regular, I don't know, regular crust pizza.
Right.
Chicago's really good at that too. Godfather's Pizza was like I was my go-to. I love Godfather's Pizza.
It's interesting because there's one right by me. I ate that growing up a bit. I have a small little place, and those are always the best that I.
Yeah.
And they're it's called Grisano's, and I really love that. But the thing with the deep dish, I don't like when people badmouth deep dish because it's a great pizza. But like most people say, Chicagoans eat way more tavern style than we do deep dish. In fact, I was getting really tired because like my friends like going, "What do you want? Oh, let's get pizza. What do you want? Oh, deep dish takes too long. Get thin crust." And it's just like, if you want deep dish, it's worth the extra 20 minutes. It really is.
Yeah. And it's definitely filling.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I remember the first time I ever had stuffed pizza. And I was like, I had one piece and I was full. I mean, and that sounds small, except when you realize there was probably 2 pounds of cheese on that one piece of pizza.
There was a place nearby where I lived, maybe like a mile and a half away. That was, I can't remember the name of it, but they would toss, like you'd sit and you could like look into the kitchen. And they'd toss the pizza dough, and then they'd put it out, and then they would sit there while you were, what you could just choose your toppings. They'd put them on right there, and then you could like watch them throw it in the oven and pull it out. Like, and that pizza was probably the best pizza I've ever had in my life. That was good pizza, and I lived in Italy for 2 years, and this was just good pizza.
Yeah, I really would love to. I really would love to hit some more of the, because that's one of the problems with like, being retired or working from home. Really, I'm not really retired, and living, on the Southwest side. There's a lot of places I just don't get to very often anymore. And now that I'm doing stand-up and traveling to open mics and stuff, I'm like, wow, I haven't been back to this part of the city in a long time. And that's one that I really I want to get out and just explore some of the cool you know,
Well,
some of
you
the
know,
cool
like if
places like that.
when I say ghetto, I don't mean like inner city ghetto, but like some of the ghettos, like little, like there's a area.
Yeah, ethnic. Yeah,
There was yeah, like an ethnic area,
Turnpike. Yeah,
like Little Poland. Did you know that outside of Warsaw, the most Polish people, like Chicago, has more Polish people than any city in the world except for Warsaw.
I hate to say this, it doesn't. I grew up knowing that, and I
Oh,
found out someone's like, no, there's like 10 cities in Poland.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Here's my favorite Polish stat.
but there's like the if you've never been to Little Poland, it's up on Pulaski, like maybe I forget the name of the street. It's not Kimble. That's the wrong way. It's if you go north on to the next, you know how they've got it like the grid with
Right.
the major streets every mile. It's the next one past Pulaski, and then you go left and you're into Little Poland area. And that has like these most amazing restaurants, and you can, you know, they've got all these Polish pickles and stuff like that. You can, like, if you like pierogies, I mean, you can get the most amazing pierogies. But
Yeah.
if I were retired in Poland, that's what I just go to a different ethnic, like Little Greece, Little Italy, of course,
Right.
you know,
There-
and
there
just
was-
eat restaurants from different areas.
My favorite Polish trivia. I did my senior paper as an undergrad on the stockyards in Chicago, and I discovered that at one point, 1 out of every 2 immigrants to Chicago from Poland
Mhm.
owned a bar.
Wow.
I'm guessing there weren't thousands of them, but still, that was like pretty impressive. And I know of a really Polish neighborhood that just kind of changed a little bit. It's got a lot more Mexican influence in it. Around the Pope Pope John Paul, when he came there, went there. It's like 40th and Kedzie-ish.
Okay, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, my sister taught at a church there called Five Holy Martyrs. She taught there for like 4 years or so. And I used to take the bus when I was going to Columbia College. I used to take the bus there. And I just remember, like, everywhere you went, there'd actually be signs in Polish and stuff. Now, that was 30 years ago and all. But I always wanted to stop at some of these places to eat, and I never, but I was on a bus, so I never could.
So much good food there. So, like, Chicago is really, and and it's like when I remember somebody was mentioning this on my Twitter account one time, and I thought it was a great reply about, like, how boring would food in America be if it weren't for immigrants?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, our food really, everything from, you just look, even Southern Black culture.
Yeah.
Everything from barbecue to fried chicken, got perfected there. And I really feel like what generally makes ethnic food so good is a lack of quality ingredients, which sounds opposite. Mm-hmm. But when you only get, like, the poorest cuts of meat and you want to make them good, you have to figure out a great way to prepare them.
Yeah.
And, when you've got a limited choice of vegetables and things, it's funny, like the Irish get associated with corned beef and cabbage, obviously. And that's a total Irish American thing, because in Ireland, it was generally pork you ate to celebrate. And the Irish immigrants to New York, all the butchers and delis, they couldn't get pork.
Yeah.
So they started doing the corned beef. And that was how how that became the thing. But it just feels like everybody with their own little, and I love, when cuisine comes, together, and, people who are, used to eating, Chinese food suddenly try Mexican food and come up with something, kind of combining the two.
Yeah, like the fusion. When I was during the pandemic, I want to get back into this, but during the pandemic, I started doing this thing where every Saturday I would make a comfort food from a different country, like whatever that, like I did Cuba, I did China, where I made, like fried rice, and I would like watch a bunch of videos from people in that country and kind of learn about like you're talking about earlier with the food, the channels from history. There's usually a lot of culture attached to these comfort
Yeah.
foods. So I'd learn about the food, I'd learn about how to cook it, learn about the history of it. And it was a great hobby. And I had so much good food. And the best thing about it is it was so cheap. Like, like you're using chicken thighs or, like
Right.
you're not using like these expensive cuts of, like it wasn't like Martha Stewart where you have to go down to your, local grocery and get some kind of weird cheese that's $70 a pound or whatever. It was.
Yeah. Thighs are like the cheapest cut and they're the best. They're so flavorful. I really prefer them to breasts, and I'm probably the only person when I like, would have leftover fried chicken where the breasts would be the ones that would be sitting the longest,
Yeah. Well, because they don't dry out, and
Yeah.
you can also like just like I'll look for like the leg quarters
Yeah.
are actually super cheap, and it's like it takes you 30 seconds to cut them. So I'll like take them home, cut them, and refreeze them, and anyway.
Sure.
Enough on that.
I actually had a similar hobby I still do. Christmas. All right. Christmas is tend to be kind of small for me. Just like one sister and I will generally find some way to celebrate, but like, my parents are dead and I'm single, and so I have a lot of friends, and that's great. But at Christmas time, everybody's going home for Christmas or whatever. And so I've made a lot of my own traditions, I generally we have a big, party with my friends, and I always have, a couple days before. And one of the things I started doing on Christmas Eve, I love film noir. TCM plays a bunch of it, and I will just do a TCM movie night and just make cocktails from film noir movies that I've never tried. Just so
that's cool.
So yeah, so I made boxcars.
Not in the mixology, huh?
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
And I mean, like, I'm no Pete Hegsa. I drink like 4 times a year and not really that much. But, well, more now that I'm doing open mics. But, I would just like, I want to try boxcars because they mentioned them in this movie, and I have no idea what they taste like.
What is that? No, I love exploring food. I've been to 36 countries. And I've learned to like, I appreciate like food from all over the world. And so I thought, well, maybe let's try to cook it. So like, anyway, I need to stop before we hit 2 hours for like reasons. You've been a wonderful guest, and I really appreciate we didn't just talk about politics or whatever, and getting to know the real you. So yeah, thanks for coming on. And before we go, you mentioned your Amazon book.
I guess that's the one way. I guess that's the one way I really have. If you want to just support me, I have a book available on paperback and ebook, and it's also on pretty much anywhere you can get an ebook. I think Amazon might be the only place you can get the paperback, and it's called Detective Jesus #1, Thou Shalt Not Kill. And it came off of the show Lucifer as an idea where everybody had to become a police procedural. The devil comes to earth, and what does he do? He solves homicides. So I decided Jesus came back, and what if he got distracted by solving crimes? And it's not a pro-religious book, and it's not an anti-religious book. It's just, you just have to accept the concept that it's Jesus. And every detective from the 70s had to have that by the book commanding officer. So in a very awkward moment, his commander is actually a descendant of Pontius Pilate, talking about being by the book, So, I have a speech really early on where, he's like, I've got the mayor breathing down my neck. The chief of police is going to crucify me. Oh my gosh, I am so sorry. So if you like 70s cops or you just want to support me, you check it out. And if you're on Twitter, it's the link that's pinned to my profile.
Okay. And I'll drop that in the description for this video too. So anybody that wants to watch it or buy it can get it from there. So and we'll be looking forward to your new book,
President Lightning.
President Lightning.
He was born to lead, but he was made to run.
There you go. So
all right. Well,
yeah, so that should wrap it up.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you on Twitter and Blue Sky.
I'm on Blue Sky too. Same name, Rep Jack Kimble. No spaces.
Okay. Talk to you later. Thanks for joining us.